My 8-year-old daughter stood in my mother's dining room, holding a dog bowl filled with table scraps, while my entire family laughed. I can still hear it. That laughter. It wasn't nervous laughter or uncomfortable laughter. It was the kind of laughter that comes from people who genuinely find something funny. My mother, my father, my brothers, my nephews, all of them laughing at a little girl holding a metal bowl full of turkey skin and gristle, tears streaming down her face. My brother Truett was the one who handed it to her. He stood there with this grin on his face, the same grin he's had since we were kids, the one that says he knows he can do whatever he wants and nobody will ever stop him. He pointed at my daughter and said 5 words I will never forget as long as I live. Dogs eat last. You're the family dog. And every single person at that Thanksgiving table just watched. Some of them smiled. My mother covered her mouth like she was trying to hide her amusement. My father looked down at his plate and said nothing. My other brother, Desmond, actually clapped. He clapped like Truett had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. My daughter, Willa, stood there frozen. She's 8 years old. She has blonde hair that she likes to wear in 2 braids. She draws pictures of animals and writes little stories about them. She asked me 3 times on the drive over if Grandma would like the card she made. She spent 2 hours coloring a turkey and writing, "I love you, Grandma," in her best handwriting. And now she was standing in that dining room, surrounded by people who were supposed to love her, holding a dog bowl. She dropped it. The bowl clattered against the hardwood floor and scraps scattered everywhere. Then she ran. She pushed past me so fast I barely had time to react. I heard the front door slam. I heard her footsteps on the porch, then silence. I looked at my family. I looked at every single one of them. My mother was already reaching for a napkin to clean up the mess on the floor. My father was still staring at his plate. Truett was laughing and shaking his head like this was all just harmless fun. Nobody moved to go after her. Nobody said a word. So I followed her. I grabbed my coat and her coat, and I walked out of that house without saying a single word to any of them. Behind me, I heard Truett call out, "What? It was a joke. She needs to learn how to take a joke." That was Thanksgiving. That was the day my family showed me exactly who they are. And 2 days later, every single one of them woke up to something that made them scream. My name is Corinne Ablewhite. I'm 36 years old. I work as a dental hygienist at a small practice about 20 minutes from my apartment. I've been divorced for 14 months. I have 1 daughter, Willa, who is my entire world. And for my whole life, I've been the child my family forgot existed. I'm the middle child. That's what I always told myself was the problem. Truett is the oldest, 41, successful, married, 2 sons, everything my parents ever wanted in a child. Desmond is the youngest, 33, still lives in my mother's basement, has never held a job for more than 6 months, but somehow he's still the baby who needs protecting. And then there's me, Corinne, the one in the middle. The one nobody ever worried about because I never caused any trouble. The one they could overlook because I never demanded attention. I spent my whole childhood trying to earn a place in my family. I got good grades. I stayed out of trouble. I helped my mother with dinner. I never talked back. I did everything right. And none of it mattered. Truett was still the golden child. Desmond was still the baby. And I was still invisible. When I got married, I thought maybe things would change. I thought my family would see me as an adult, as someone who had her own life, her own value. But my mother spent my entire wedding reception talking about how Truett's wedding had been bigger. When I announced I was pregnant with Willa, my father nodded and went back to watching television. When I brought Willa home from the hospital, my mother visited once. She stayed for 45 minutes and spent most of it criticizing how I had arranged the nursery. And then came the divorce. I didn't want to get divorced. I tried everything to save my marriage. Counseling, conversations, compromises. But my husband had already made up his mind. He wanted out. He moved to another state 3 weeks after the paperwork was finalized. He calls Willa on her birthday. That's about it. When my family found out about the divorce, I thought maybe they would offer support. Maybe they would check on me. Maybe they would help with Willa while I figured out how to be a single mother. Instead, my mother said, "Well, I can't say I'm surprised. You always did have trouble keeping things together." Truett called me the cautionary tale. He actually said that at Easter dinner last year. He pointed at me and told his sons, "See, boys, this is what happens when you make bad choices. You end up like Aunt Corinne." Desmond just laughed. He always laughs at whatever Truett says. And my father? My father said nothing. He's never said anything. He just sits there and watches while his family tears each other apart, and he never opens his mouth. That's my family. Those are the people I drove 2 hours to see on Thanksgiving. Those are the people I brought my daughter to visit because she begged me, because she wanted to see her grandmother, because she made a card, because she thought maybe this year would be different. I should have known better. I should have protected her. I should have kept her far away from all of them. But I didn't. And my daughter paid the price. She stood in that dining room holding a dog bowl full of scraps while my family laughed at her. She heard her uncle call her a dog. She saw her grandmother smile. She watched her grandfather do nothing. And then she ran. I found her at the end of the driveway sitting on the cold curb, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I wrapped my coat around her and held her against my chest and felt her whole body shake. "Mommy," she said between sobs, "why did they hate me? What did I do wrong?" That question from my 8-year-old daughter, that question broke something inside me that I didn't even know could still break. I had spent my entire life accepting how my family treated me. I had made excuses for them. I had told myself that all families were like this. I had convinced myself that I was being too sensitive, that I needed to learn how to take a joke, that I just needed to try harder and eventually they would love me the way I needed to be loved. But hearing my daughter ask what she did wrong, hearing her blame herself for their cruelty, seeing her sweet face twisted in pain because the people who were supposed to love her had treated her like she was less than human, something shifted in me that night. Something that had been building for 36 years finally clicked into place. I was done. I was done being silent. I was done being invisible. I was done letting my family treat me like I didn't matter, and I was absolutely done letting them anywhere near my daughter. They wanted to call her a dog. They wanted to laugh at her. They wanted to make her feel small and worthless and broken. Fine. But they were going to learn something that Thanksgiving night. They were going to learn that this dog had teeth, and I was ready to bite. The morning of Thanksgiving started with hope. That was the cruel part. I actually believed things might be different this year. Willa woke up early, too excited to sleep. She came into my bedroom at 6 in the morning, already dressed in the outfit she had picked out 3 days earlier, a burgundy dress with little white flowers on it, white tights, her nice shoes. She had even attempted to braid her own hair, though it was lopsided and falling apart on one side. "Mommy, can you fix my braids? I want to look pretty for Grandma." I sat up in bed and looked at my daughter. She was practically glowing. This child who had been through so much in the past year, whose father had abandoned her, who had cried herself to sleep more nights than I could count, was standing in my doorway radiating pure joy because she was going to see her grandmother. I should have told her we weren't going. I should have made up an excuse, a stomach bug, car trouble, anything. But I looked at her face and I couldn't do it. I couldn't take this away from her. "Come here, baby, let me fix those braids." She sat on the floor between my knees while I redid her hair, and she talked nonstop about the cards she had made. She had drawn a turkey with colorful feathers, and she had written a message inside. She made me promise not to read it because it was private, just for Grandma. She had also drawn a smaller card for Grandpa, and one for Uncle Truett, and one for Uncle Desmond. "Do you think they'll like them?" she asked. "I think they'll love them," I said. That was the first lie I told that day. We left the apartment around noon. It was a 2-hour drive to my parents' house, and Willa spent most of it looking out the window and asking questions. Would Griffin and Hayes want to play with her? Would Grandma make her special mashed potatoes? Could she help set the table? I answered her questions with a smile plastered on my face, but inside I was already bracing myself. I knew what my family was like. I knew how they treated me. But I told myself that they would never be cruel to a child. I told myself that whatever problems they had with me, they would leave Willa out of it. I was wrong. We pulled into the driveway at 2:15. The house looked beautiful. My mother always went all out for holidays. Wreaths on the door, candles in every window, the smell of roasting turkey drifting out into the cold November air. It looked like something from a magazine. It looked warm and welcoming and perfect. Appearances were everything to my mother. Willa unbuckled her seatbelt before I even turned off the engine. "Come on, Mommy, let's go!" I grabbed the pie I had made from the back seat. Pecan pie, my grandmother's recipe. I had spent 2 hours on it the night before, making sure the crust was perfect, making sure the filling was just right. I thought maybe if I contributed something, my mother would have one less thing to criticize. We walked up to the front door, and Willa rang the bell. She was bouncing on her heels, clutching her handmade cards against her chest. The door opened, and my mother appeared, wearing a cream-colored sweater and perfectly pressed slacks. Her hair was styled. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like she was hosting a photo shoot, not a family dinner. "Oh," she said, looking at us. "You actually came." Not hello, not happy Thanksgiving, not look how pretty you look, Willa. Just, "Oh, you actually came," delivered in a tone that made it clear she had been hoping we wouldn't. "Hi, Mom. Happy Thanksgiving." I held up the pie. "I brought dessert." She glanced at it without interest. "You can put that in the kitchen. I already made 3 pies, but I suppose we can find room." Willa stepped forward, holding out her cards. "Grandma, I made you something. I drew it myself." My mother looked down at my daughter like she was examining something mildly inconvenient. She took the card without opening it. "That's nice, dear. Why don't you go find your cousins? They're in the living room." She turned and walked away, leaving us standing in the doorway. Willa's face fell for just a moment. Then she recovered, because that's what she does. She finds the good in everything. She tells herself that Grandma is just busy, that Grandma will look at the card later, that Grandma didn't mean to seem dismissive. We walked inside, and that's when I noticed the table. The dining room table was set beautifully. My mother's good china, cloth napkins, crystal glasses, and exactly enough chairs for everyone except me and my daughter. Truett was lounging in the living room with Kendra. Griffin and Hayes were playing video games, ignoring everyone. Desmond was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. My father was sitting in his recliner, watching football, already checked out of everything happening around him. Nobody got up when we walked in. Nobody said hello. Truett glanced over his shoulder and smirked. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, the divorcee and her kid." Kendra laughed. Griffin and Hayes didn't even look up. Willa's hand found mine. She squeezed my fingers, and I squeezed back. "Happy Thanksgiving to you too, Truett," I said. He turned back to the television without responding. I led Willa to the corner of the living room, away from everyone else, and we sat down together on a small love seat that was clearly meant to be decorative, not functional. It was hard and uncomfortable, and I realized that's exactly why we had been directed there. We were an afterthought, an inconvenience. Guests who had shown up to a party where they weren't wanted. My mother emerged from the kitchen and clapped her hands. "Dinner in 30 minutes. Truett, can you get the folding chair from the garage? We need extra seating." 1 folding chair for 2 people. That's when I knew. That's when I understood that everything I had hoped for was a fantasy. My family hadn't changed. They never would. But I stayed. I stayed because Willa had looked so happy that morning. I stayed because I wanted to give her one good memory. I stayed because I didn't know yet just how bad it was going to get. That was my mistake. Dinner was called at 3 o'clock. Everyone moved to the dining room, and I watched as my family took their seats. Truett sat at the head of the table, right next to my father, like he was the co-patriarch of this family. Kendra sat beside him, then Griffin and Hayes. My mother sat at the other end, closest to the kitchen, so she could monitor everything. Desmond took the seat next to her. That left the corner, the very end of the table crammed against the wall where a single folding chair had been placed. "Corinne, you and Willa can share," my mother said without looking at us. We didn't have time to get another chair. They owned 8 dining chairs and at least 4 folding chairs. I had seen them in the garage when I was growing up, but apparently finding one more was too much trouble for their granddaughter. I didn't argue. I just guided Willa to the folding chair and sat down, pulling her onto my lap. She was too big for this. Her knees bumped the table. But she didn't complain. She just settled against me and waited. Truett carved the turkey with a theatrical flourish, making comments about how he had learned the proper technique from a cooking show. Plates were passed around the table. I watched as everyone received generous portions, thick slices of turkey, mountains of mashed potatoes, stuffing, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, gravy poured over everything. Then our plate arrived. 2 thin slices of turkey breast, mostly dry, a small scoop of mashed potatoes, nothing else, no stuffing, no green beans, no cranberry sauce, no gravy. Willa looked at the plate, then looked at me. She didn't say anything, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She could see what everyone else had received. She knew this wasn't the same. I flagged down my mother. "Mom, could we get some stuffing? And maybe some gravy?" My mother sighed like I had asked her to prepare an entirely new meal. "There's not much left, Corinne. Maybe you should have arrived earlier if you wanted first choice." We had arrived exactly when she told us to arrive. Kendra leaned forward with a smile that wasn't really a smile. "Well, Corinne, I guess you're used to small portions now, right? Living in that tiny apartment of yours. How big is it again? Like 1 room?" Desmond snorted. "She's probably on food stamps. We should have just mailed her a can of cranberry sauce and called it a day." The table erupted in laughter. Even my father chuckled quietly, though he tried to hide it behind his napkin. Willa pressed closer against me. I could feel her heart beating fast. "We're fine," I said quietly. "Thank you for having us." The meal continued. Truett dominated the conversation, talking about his latest promotion at work, his new car, the vacation he and Kendra were planning to take in February. My mother listened with rapt attention, praising every accomplishment, asking follow-up questions, treating him like he had just announced he won the Nobel Prize. Nobody asked about my life. Nobody asked how Willa was doing in school. Nobody acknowledged that we existed except to make jokes at our expense. Willa tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, can I have some stuffing, please?" It was such a small request, stuffing. My daughter just wanted some stuffing. I looked at the bowl, which was still half full, sitting right in front of my mother. "Mom, could you please pass the stuffing?" My mother glanced at the bowl, then at Willa, then back at me. "There's really not enough to go around, Corinne. Maybe next year you can contribute a dish instead of showing up empty-handed." I had brought a pie. I had told her about the pie. It was sitting in her kitchen right now. "I brought a pie," I said. "Pecan," she said dismissively. "I already made pecan, and pumpkin and apple. I'm not sure what we're going to do with 4 pies." Griffin and Hayes started whispering to each other, glancing at Willa and giggling. Hayes said something to his brother, and they both laughed louder. Then Hayes looked directly at Willa and said, "You're so skinny. Does your mom even feed you?" Willa's face crumpled. She looked down at her lap, and I saw a tear drop onto her dress. "Hayes," I said firmly, "that's not appropriate." Kendra immediately jumped to her son's defense. "He's just asking a question, Corinne. Don't be so sensitive." "Yeah," Truett added. "The kid's just curious. Maybe if you fed her properly, she wouldn't look so scrawny." More laughter. My mother, my father, Desmond, even Griffin and Hayes, who probably didn't fully understand what was funny, but knew they were supposed to laugh. Willa was crying silently now, tears streaming down her cheeks while she stared at her lap. She was trying so hard to be invisible. She was trying so hard not to make things worse. My hands were shaking. I wanted to stand up and scream at every single one of them. I wanted to flip the table over. I wanted to grab my daughter and run, but I didn't. I sat there frozen, just like my father, telling myself it would be over soon, telling myself we just had to get through dessert, telling myself that making a scene would only make things worse. That was the last normal moment. That was the last second before everything changed. Because that's when dinner ended and people started moving to the living room. That's when Willa stayed behind to finish the small amount of food on her plate because she was still hungry. That's when Truett disappeared into the kitchen. And that's when he came back holding a metal dog bowl filled with scraps. I found Willa at the end of the driveway, sitting on the frozen curb with her arms wrapped around her knees. The temperature had dropped since we arrived, and her breath came out in little white clouds. She was shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or the sobbing. I ran to her and wrapped her coat around her shoulders, then pulled her against my chest and held her as tightly as I could. She buried her face in my sweater and cried so hard her whole body convulsed. I had never heard my daughter make sounds like that before. It was like something inside her had broken. "Mommy," she gasped between sobs, "why do they hate me? What did I do wrong?" I felt those words like a physical blow. My 8-year-old daughter, who had done nothing but exist, was asking me what she did to deserve being treated like an animal. She was blaming herself for their cruelty. She thought this was her fault. "Listen to me," I said, pulling back to look at her face. I held her cheeks in my hands and made her meet my eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing. Do you understand me? You are perfect. You are kind and smart and wonderful, and what they did in there has nothing to do with you. That was about them. That was their cruelty, their ugliness, their failure. Not yours. Never yours." She nodded, but I could see she didn't fully believe me. How could she? She had just experienced something that no child should ever experience, and the people who did it to her were supposed to be her family. I helped her stand and walked her to the car. I buckled her into the back seat and turned the heat on full blast. Then I stood outside the car for a moment, looking back at my parents' house. The windows glowed with warm light. I could hear laughter from inside. They were probably already talking about how oversensitive I was, how Willa needed to toughen up, how the whole thing was just a harmless joke. I got in the car and drove away. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't go back for the pie. I just left. Willa fell asleep about 30 minutes into the drive, exhausted from crying. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, at her tear-stained face and her lopsided braids and her burgundy dress with the little white flowers. She had been so excited that morning. She had wanted so badly to be loved. Something shifted inside me during that drive. It was like a door that had been locked for 36 years finally swung open, and I could see clearly for the first time. I had spent my entire life accepting the way my family treated me. I had made excuses. I had convinced myself that I was the problem, that if I just tried harder or stayed quieter or asked for less, they would eventually love me properly, but they never would. I understood that now. They were incapable of it. Not because of anything I had done or failed to do, but because cruelty was woven into the fabric of who they were. They enjoyed making people feel small. It gave them power. It made them feel important. And now, they had done it to my daughter. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Willa had asked what she did wrong. My sweet girl who drew cards and braided her own hair and just wanted her grandmother to love her, she asked what she did wrong. By the time I pulled into our apartment complex, I had made a decision. I was done being silent. I was done protecting people who had never once protected me. I was done pretending that my family was anything other than what they actually were. That night, after Willa was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. I stared at the screen for a long time, thinking about what I wanted to say. I thought about my mother and her precious reputation at church. I thought about Truett and his important job. I thought about all the people in their lives who believed they were good, decent, respectable people. They had built their entire identities on appearances. They had spent decades cultivating an image of the perfect family, and I had helped them do it by staying silent. Not anymore. I started with the post. I wrote everything. The dog bowl, the scraps, the words my brother said, the laughter, my daughter running out into the cold. I wrote about the folding chair and the tiny portions and the comments about food stamps. I wrote about 36 years of being invisible, and I wrote about watching my daughter experience the same cruelty I had endured my whole life. Then I posted it, publicly, with my full name attached, but I wasn't finished. The next morning, I started making phone calls. I called Pastor Holbrook at my mother's church and told him what happened at Thanksgiving dinner. I called the insurance company where Truett worked and asked to speak with someone in human resources. I called Desmond's ex-girlfriend, a woman named Patrice, who had once confided in me about how the family treated her. I called neighbors. I called old family friends. I called anyone who had ever believed the Abel White family was something special. I didn't lie. I didn't exaggerate. I simply told the truth. And then I waited. 2 days after Thanksgiving, my phone started buzzing with notifications. I ignored them at first because I was making breakfast for Willa, pancakes with chocolate chips, her favorite. She was still quiet, still fragile from what happened, but she smiled when I put the plate in front of her. That smile was everything to me. Then my phone buzzed again, and again, and again. I picked it up and saw that my post had been shared over 400 times. Comments were pouring in. Messages filled my inbox. People I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out, telling me they had no idea, telling me they were so sorry, telling me they always suspected something was off about the Ablewhites, but the real chaos was just beginning. At 6:47 that morning, my mother woke up to a phone call from Pastor Holbrook. I know the exact time because she told me later. Screaming it into my voicemail like the timestamp was evidence of my crime. Pastor Holbrook had received multiple calls from congregation members who had seen my post. They wanted to know if it was true. They wanted to know if Darlene Ablewhite, who chaired the charity committee and organized the annual Christmas fundraiser, had really stood by while her son humiliated an 8-year-old girl with a dog bowl. Pastor Holbrook asked my mother to come in for a meeting with the church board. He used the word troubling 3 times. He said the congregation had concerns about her continued leadership role. My mother screamed when she hung up the phone. I know because Desmond told me later, trying to make me feel guilty. He said she screamed so loud he thought someone had died. At 7:15, Truett woke up to an email from his company's Human Resources Department. The subject line read, "Urgent meeting required." The body of the email was short and professional. It informed him that the company had received information regarding conduct that may be inconsistent with their core values, and his presence was required at the main office at 9 o'clock sharp. Attached to the email was a screenshot of my post. Someone had tagged his company. Someone had sent it directly to his supervisors. By the time Truett finished reading the email, his hands were shaking. Kendra told me this when she called to curse me out. She said he threw his phone across the bedroom and screamed so loud the boys came running. At 7:32, Desmond discovered that his ex-girlfriend Patrice had made her own post. She shared my story and added her own experiences. She wrote about how the Ablewhite family had treated her during the 2 years she dated Desmond. She wrote about the comments Darlene made about her weight. She wrote about Truett calling her Desmond's charity case at a family barbecue. She wrote about the time Desmond told her she was lucky he was even willing to be seen with her. Her post was shared even more than mine. People started adding their own stories in the comments. Former classmates of Truett who remembered his bullying, neighbors who had witnessed my mother's cruelty, co-workers of my father who said he watched everything and never intervened. The Ablewhite family's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. By noon, my mother had been asked to step down from all 3 of her church committees. The neighborhood association president called to suggest that perhaps the Ablewhites should skip the Christmas party this year, just until things settled down. 2 of my mother's closest friends stopped returning her calls. By 3 o'clock, Truett had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. It wasn't because of what he did at Thanksgiving, it was because of what he did after. He had posted a defensive response on social media that included language his company found, in their words, inconsistent with their commitment to respect and professionalism. He called me names. He called the people sharing my post names. He used words that human resources departments do not tolerate. By evening, the local news had picked up the story. A reporter reached out to me asking for a comment. I declined, but others didn't. Patrice gave an interview. A former neighbor gave an interview. Someone who claimed to have gone to high school with Truett gave an interview. The Ablewhites were being exposed, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. My phone rang at 8 o'clock that night. It was my father. "Corinne." His voice sounded hollow. "Please, take it down, please. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. Truett might lose his job. The church called, the neighbors are talking. Please, Corinne, we're your family." I was quiet for a moment. I listened to my father breathe. I thought about all the times he had watched his children be cruel and said nothing. I thought about him sitting in his recliner while my brother handed my daughter a dog bowl. "Dad," I said, "did you see Truett get that bowl from the kitchen?" Silence. "I saw him walk toward the kitchen," he finally admitted, "and you didn't stop him." "I didn't think he would actually do anything." "You never think, Dad. You never do anything. You just watch." "Corinne, please." "No," I said. I'm not taking it down. For the first time in my life, I told the truth about this family. If the truth destroys you, that's not my fault, that's yours. I hung up, and I felt nothing but peace. The weeks that followed Thanksgiving were the quietest of my life. No phone calls from my mother criticizing my choices, no passive-aggressive texts from Truett, no awkward holiday gatherings where I had to pretend everything was fine. Just silence. And for the first time, that silence felt like freedom. Christmas came, and Willa and I spent it alone in our small apartment. We decorated a tiny tree with ornaments we made ourselves. We baked cookies and watched old movies and stayed in our pajamas until noon. There were no fancy china plates or cloth napkins. There was no perfectly roasted turkey or 3 kinds of pie. There was just me and my daughter, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, drinking hot cocoa and laughing at nothing in particular. It was the best Christmas I had ever had. One evening, about a week after the holiday, Willa looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mommy, is Grandma mad at me?" I pulled her onto my lap, even though she was getting too big for it, and I held her close. "Grandma isn't mad at you, baby. What happened had nothing to do with you. Grandma and the rest of the family are dealing with something that they created themselves. You did nothing wrong. You will never do anything wrong by expecting people to treat you with kindness. But they're family," she said quietly. "Being family doesn't give anyone the right to hurt you," I told her. "Family is supposed to love you and protect you and make you feel safe. Anyone who can't do that doesn't deserve to be in your life, even if you share the same blood." She thought about that for a moment. Then she nodded slowly and rested her head against my shoulder. I held her there for a long time, grateful that she was mine, grateful that I had finally found the courage to protect her. 3 weeks after Christmas, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my father standing on the welcome mat. He looked older than I had ever seen him. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were red and tired. He wasn't wearing a coat despite the cold. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated. Then I stepped aside. He sat on my couch and looked around the apartment. It was small and modest, nothing like the house I grew up in. But it was mine. It was ours. It was safe. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Corinne. My whole life I've made mistakes. I told myself that staying quiet was the same as keeping peace. I told myself that if I didn't participate in the cruelty, I wasn't responsible for it. But I was wrong. I was responsible every single time I watched and did nothing. I was responsible when you were a child, and I let your mother favor your brothers. I was responsible when you got divorced, and I let everyone mock you. I was responsible at Thanksgiving when I saw Truett walk into that kitchen, and I didn't move from my chair. I sat across from him, but I didn't respond. I just let him talk. I'm not asking you to forgive me," he continued. "I don't deserve that. I'm not asking you to take down what you wrote. The truth needed to be told. I'm asking if I can try to be different, if I can be a grandfather to Willa, a real one who protects her instead of sitting by while she gets hurt." I looked at my father for a long time. I saw the man who had failed me over and over again, but I also saw something I had never seen before. I saw regret. I saw shame. I saw someone who finally understood what his silence had cost. "I don't know, Dad," I said honestly. "I really don't know if that's possible." "That's fair," he said. "That's more than fair." He stood up slowly and walked toward the door. Before he left, he turned back to face me. "For what it's worth, Corinne, I'm proud of you. I should have said that a long time ago. You're a good mother, better than any of us deserved." Then he was gone. That night, I sat on the edge of Willa's bed while she drifted off to sleep. She looked peaceful for the first time in weeks. The tension that had been in her little body since Thanksgiving had finally started to ease. "Mom," she murmured, half asleep. "Yes, baby? Are we going to be okay?" I smoothed her hair back from her forehead and kissed her gently. "Yeah, sweetheart. We're going to be okay. We're going to be more than okay. Because we have each other. And that's enough. That's always going to be enough." She smiled with her eyes closed, and then she was asleep. I sat there for a while longer, listening to her breathe, thinking about everything that had happened. I thought about the dog bowl and the laughter. I thought about my brother's cruel words and my mother's indifference. I thought about 36 years of being invisible and the moment I finally decided to be seen. They called my daughter the family dog. They meant it as an insult, as a way to dehumanize her, to put her in her place. But here's what I realized in the weeks that followed. Dogs are loyal. Dogs are loving. Dogs protect the people they care about. Dogs love unconditionally and never ask for anything in return except to be loved back. If that's what they saw when they looked at my daughter, then maybe being called the family dog wasn't the insult they intended. Maybe it was a compliment that they were too cruel to understand. We didn't need a family that couldn't see her worth. We didn't need people who confused cruelty for humor and silence for peace. We just needed each other, and that was more than enough. If this story touched your heart, I want to ask you for a small favor. Take a moment to share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe someone who is dealing with a difficult family situation. Maybe someone who needs to know that they deserve better. Your shares help more than you know. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect yourself or someone you love? I read every single comment and I want to hear your story. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. We post new videos every week, and every single one of them is about ordinary people finding the courage to stand up for themselves. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are worthy of love and respect, no matter what anyone tells you. Until next time.